Welcome to the Neurodiaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, writer, speaker, and mental health advocate. This podcast is a safe space where we can amplify our voices together. My mission is to make the world a safer and happier place for neurodivergent children and those struggling with mental health conditions and mental illness. The Neurodiaries podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. This episode was recorded on Narrigo country. This podcast openly discusses mental health issues and may contain content that is distressing for some. Please take care in deciding if this content is right for you today. Breaking stigma through stories. Welcome to the Neurodiaries podcast. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Neurodiaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, and today I've got Birdie Thorn here with me. Birdie is on Instagram as Birdie's Bipolar Brain. She's a writer, speaker, and mental health advocate, and I'm really excited to have her here today to talk about her experience with mental health. Welcome, Birdie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I also just wanted to introduce your book a little bit and speak about that. Birdie's just recently released a novel called I Am Her, She Is Me. Birdie, I'll give you a chance to talk about it a little bit. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it, so don't spoil the ending for me, but I'm loving it so far. Do you want to talk us through what it's about?
Yeah, so it's about a woman, who has bipolar, and she tries to live life untreated and trying to navigate all life's things, trying basically to wing it with a mental health condition that definitely shouldn't be winged. And so it's just her things that she goes through, and with relationships and friendships and her relationship with her mom, just kind of what that looks like when you have a mental health condition.
I love that. That's so cool. And some of the things that, the way that you describe what she's going through, it gives you such a strong, visceral reaction, almost like you can really put yourself in her shoes of what it feels like to go through those highs and lows with her. And I love the way in the beginning you described depression as like a dark maze that you go in with all this noise everywhere. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but I really resonated with that. And I really love it. It's just so confusing and blinding, and you're just trying to stay centered and find your way out, but there's just so much going on.
Yeah, so when I was writing the book, I actually was in a really deep, dark depression, the worst one ever. And when I had started it, it didn't really start as a book. It more started as a journal, to describe the way I was feeling. And so I think that's where the book's fiction, but a lot of it is based off of my real experiences. And one of the things I wanted to give the reader was what it's like to be inside the mind of someone who is experiencing those emotions, and just how deep it goes. It's not so surface, on the surface, oh, they just look sad. No, they're going through it so deep inside that you can't imagine the depths there in their brain. They're miles into it where you're just seeing the surface of it.
Yeah, that's I really felt that actually. You really go to the depths with the characters there. Yeah, and being bipolar myself as well, I could relate to I really felt that, relation to what that felt like. I was going to ask you, because, it is written as a fiction book, but then how much it is based sort of on your personal experience as well.
Yeah, so a lot of the emotion behind it is, it's almost all based off of real emotions that I've felt. There's some parts in it that, I'm trying not to give any spoilers, that aren't, based off of real things, but again, based off of real experiences that I've experienced. Without spoiling too much, I struggled with my relationship with my mom for a long time. I'm really close with my mom now, but I do talk about like that struggle that we sometimes have with our parents when we're going through things.
Yeah.
And I want to describe that and explain like how that feels for both sides. And that's why it was important for me to show both sides of how people are thinking in the book. And that is kind of based off of like my mom and I. But like I said, we're really close now. But we weren't always that close.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is hard when you go through struggles, like to find the right sort of support with family. It definitely adds a level of like strain and to relationships because there's a level of understanding that's needed that isn't always available.
Yeah, yeah. And then you've got, Josh, who's another big character in the book, is loosely based off of my husband. I've been with my husband for 18 years, and it took a long time for us to work through, like, understanding, like, with me having bipolar, but he is like my rock. And there's like even lines in the book that he's actually said to me in real life that I put in the book. And so it's like there's certain things like that is loosely based off of real people in my life.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I definitely want to hear more about that as we get into the questions. I thought today we could start doing a little Dear Diary moment as well. So just to give a sense of, who we are, what we've got going on in our day-to-day lives, it's important to remember that we're just people going through everyday things and managing these conditions alongside of that. So I guess for me, like Dear Diary, it's really my first week of doing podcast records this week. So that's consuming my every thought this week. I'm like unable to switch off from it and just, I'm sure it will become second nature over time, but at the moment I'm very like hyped up and aware before every interview like this and feeling a bit nervous about it, like definitely dealing with a little of like imposter syndrome and just have to, remind myself that like it's okay to suck a little bit when I start and just, but of just having a lot of like, what the fuck am I doing sort of moments and then just trying to override that and keep going.
Yeah. Okay, I've been on a few podcasts and I'm going to tell you now, you're doing great. Like, you're doing really well.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice for me to hear. I appreciate it. Okay, what about you? What's your Dear Diary moment?
So mine would be kind of the same idea with imposter syndrome. This week has been, I'm someone that has really unrealistic expectations in a lot of areas of my life. And I often, when you do like content creating, you're portraying something and someone, and a lot of it is very much me, but on the backside, what people aren't seeing is like that insecurity that like, like this week, for instance, it's like, I have no idea what video I'm going to do next. And it's been stressing me the hell out. Like, what do I do? It's like these expectations, but then I've also got these like really unrealistic expectations for selling my book and how many copies I should be selling. And I'm like obsessively, I don't know if you are familiar with like KDP on Amazon. It shows you how many books you've sold. So I'm like sitting here like obsessively refreshing all day long. And like then I have mom guilt because I have two kids. So I'm like, if I'm not selling the book amount that I expected, it's like I notice that it's like leaching out into my family. And so I've been this week really working on reining that in instead of going like, oh, I only sold 3 books today. Like, I'm like, wow, I sold 3 books today. Like, look at me go. So yeah, it's like, it's stuff like that where it's like the stress that people don't see that we're really like going through, but like hiding it behind a smile. And it's like, I don't want to, cook dinner tonight because I want to sit here and refresh my book count.
I can relate to that as well. I have 2 young kids too, and it is like, you do get so caught up in like these passion projects, and sometimes that's all you want to do, and it's such an inconvenience to have to stop and like, look after the family.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I think that,
um,
a lot of times people don't realize that when you have kids, like it's that whole thing that gets portrayed like the housewife and the mom that's cooking and cleaning and doing the projects, and it's like, no, like, no, it's not like that. No, at least not over here. It's not like that. It's very different. And but I have to remember like to rein in what I'm doing to because I do have kids.
yeah, it's like as much as it sort of feels like an inconvenience at times, I also think it probably makes me more productive at the end of the day. Because if I didn't have like this definite like stop time, I'd probably take longer and procrastinate more. But because
Yeah,
like 4 o'clock, that's it. I got to pick up the kids. I got to cook dinner. Like, that whole part of the evening is like, that time's taken. So you're
yeah,
really like, all right, what have I got to get done? Go, go, go. Like I find for me that's sort of helpful in a way. Do you find that?
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, because they hold you to a schedule, and I think with I have ADHD and with bipolar, it's hard to stick to a schedule. It's hard, and we know routine is like really good for us. And so, sometimes it helps because it forces a routine. It forces you to be, involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I'm really excited to jump into more of a chat with you. I know we've sort of started talking about who you are and what you've got going on in your life, but keen to hear more about that. Sort of like mental health aside, who are you as a person? Like, what do you do for work or fun? What does your day to day look like?
So I actually was excited when I thought about this question because sometimes I do feel like we get really stuck with just talking about the mental health side of things and like, hey, we're actually human outside of it too. Outside of it is, I'm an author. That's a big thing for me is writing and having my book published, but I'm also a mom. I have my oldest daughter is getting ready to turn 16 and my youngest is getting ready to turn 13. So, I've got teenagers and my husband, we've been together. We just celebrated 18 years together. So yeah, there's a whole nother world outside of just the mental health aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your time spent doing sort of on your day to day? How do you break that up?
So I try to stick to a routine because of the mental health stuff. So it kind of, it has to be in there. But so I'm a full-time writer. I'm really grateful that I get to do that. That my husband financially provides enough that I don't have to bring in money, although I would really like to with writing. I want it to be a career. So but writing isn't, it's such a, I'm sure you can relate to this. It's not a 9 to 5. It's whenever it comes. And that creates its own,
Yeah.
issues sometimes too, because it could be midnight where I'm like, oh, I'm got a whole chapter stuck in my head that I need to get out. Or it can be the middle of the day.
Yeah.
So I would say I spend most of my time, if I'm not writing, I'm thinking about what I'm doing next creatively. And that could be, creating content for my page or writing. The other thing I do a lot of is puzzles because for some reason puzzles are very grounding for me and kind of get those creative sides, going. So other than that, I'm a relatively boring human.
That's literally all of the most exciting things you've said. So I don't think you're boring at all. I love puzzles as well. I feel like if we lived in the same city, we could be very good friends.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's go into the mental health condition. So, do you want to introduce what you have and what those symptoms look like for you?
Yes, so I have ADHD and then generalized anxiety disorder and bipolar 2. Um, I've had symptoms
Real
of
trifecta.
ADHD. Yeah, it's like lots of fun over here. But I've had the symptoms of ADHD forever. I wasn't diagnosed with any of these, by the way, until I became an adult. But as a child, like I definitely displayed symptoms, I think often about school and how I really struggled in school, even college. I went to college and it took me 4 years to get a 2 year degree. Like I've always struggled there. I'm really bad at interrupting people. That's a big one of my symptoms that I try to like keep in check. And then the anxiety one was actually a hard one for me to accept. I talk a lot on my page about like introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. I actually really love people. It's something I'm passionate about humans. I don't know. I really enjoy being around people. But I feel like the anxiety side of things tries to take that away from me. So it's like a monster in its own. So that one, I feel like I struggle with more than even with bipolar. That one that really bothers me is because I feel like it's like I've learned my way around bipolar because I really focused in on it. And but anxiety seems to be one that I feel like it's just not fair. I'm still at that point with it where it's like it's not fair how much I feel like it interrupts my life. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely. I think anxiety for one, like for me, it's one that sort of, the word gets thrown around quite a bit and it sort of loses meaning a little bit. I think I'm quite fortunate that I haven't had, I've had periods of anxiety. So I know what that feels like to be super anxious to like a debilitating point. Fortunate
Yeah.
that I haven't experienced too widely. So I wouldn't say it affects my day to day, but I've definitely had periods where I'm just like you're so frozen and it's just, you know, overthinking everything and you just really feel like you can't sort of move. So no, I definitely empathize with you there. That is a really hard one to deal with.
Yeah, that's well, and that one too, as I've always been like the outgoing person, like in my family, and when there's family get-togethers, I'm the social one. And then as I got older, I noticed that anxiety started, and it was just so random for me to experience something like that. And I've gotten better with it, but it's definitely something like, there's times where I'll be excited to go out and do things with friends, and then I'll start having like a panic attack, like start sweating profusely, and it can be in public and it's so embarrassing when it happens. And, people be looking at you and I'm always thinking like, I really like people. Like, I swear I'm not like sick or, whatever. It just happens. And it's so frustrating. And I feel like, with the bipolar, I've really learned to hone that in and really like learn symptoms and triggers and live with it successfully. And anxiety seems to be one that I still struggle to be successful with.
Yeah. I hope you can find the way to manage that one as well. Um,
Yes.
how do you cope with it publicly? Because obviously you still have your friendships and you have your children. Like you really have no choice sometimes but to get out and about. Like life doesn't stop. So when you do have to go out and do those commitments, and I know you do some public speaking around mental health as well.
Yeah.
So what do you do to cope publicly when you do have those attacks?
So what I've learned is this is going to sound strange to some, but I think a lot of people get this. What has helped with my anxiety is actually to do the things that make me anxious. And why I feel like that's helped is because it's showing me that I can do them. And being a speaker with NAMI has really changed my anxiety level and how I handle things. The first time I did a speech with NAMI, I literally thought I was going to pass out. Like I like felt like I had lost control over my own body. It was like I was so nervous. I don't even think I like spoke the way I was, had planned to, nothing. But then I was like, no, I'm going to do it again and again and again. And there was like a time where I was like sweating while I did it. And I just brought it up in this speech where I was like, I have anxiety. So if you see me sweating, like that is part of, a symptom. And addressing it head on is something that seems to help me a lot, is just telling people like, oh, I have anxiety. This is just like part of it because there's nothing I can do about it. And then there's other times where I'll just simply avoid, like, crowded places sometimes are really hard for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's so odd because I do speak and I do love to be around people, but it's like sometimes my body doesn't agree with it.
So that's really great that you do push yourself to go out and challenge yourself, and you found that sort of helps you get through.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Um, and what about like I like that you've said you call it out sometimes, and you let people know that, oh, I'm anxious, and it just, I think, makes it a bit more acceptable. Like, it's showing that you accept this about yourself. Everyone else, like, get on the same page. Like, you're sweating, doesn't matter. Like, let's just roll on, everyone. We're here, we're doing it. I know sometimes, like, if I'm having a bipolar episode and I get crying spells, so I'll cry a lot. But sometimes it's like, I'm not actually that sad. Like, I just can't stop crying, and I don't want to miss out, or I don't want to go and have to be alone. So I have a few good friends where, like, they'll let me be in that space, and it's like, yep, I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to be a bit crying now, and like, just roll on, everyone. Like, don't worry about me. Like, this is all good. Like, let's just roll with it. And then once you call it out and you're like, just let this be, please. Like, I can't help it. It kind of, like, it's nice because then you can still be there. You can still do the thing. It's like you don't have to hide away because of those symptoms you're experiencing.
Yeah, well, and I'm a really controlling person. So, like, I don't like things being able to control, like, what I'm gonna do. And so, that I think that's another reason why I started to, like, call it out in front of people. Like, my face turns red sometimes, and I'll just tell them, like, I know I'm red, it will go
Mm.
away. Like, it's just, and because it's just part of it. And I think once you get to this point, I don't know if it's age, I don't know what it is, but you get to a point where you kind of start, like, accepting that it is what it is, and then it makes it less awkward for people around you, I feel like, because if they don't understand and they just see you turning red and sweating, like, their immediate thought is like, oh, is there something wrong physically, like, are you sick, are you on drugs, like, what is going on? But I feel like once you tell them, they're like, oh, okay, and then they stop focusing on you, and it makes the anxiety kind of go away because then you don't feel like everyone's watching you.
Yeah, and that's a great way to deal with it. I love that you found a way to make that work for you. So I might go into the diagnosis side of things. So like, how old were you when you started to notice these things coming up for you, and how did that journey look like in terms of getting help and getting the right diagnosis?
So with bipolar, it was I was in my early 20s, and I remember prior to that, like, experiencing what I would think was depression. And just like, it didn't feel, I would talk to friends and they would never be talking the way I would was thinking. So, like, just, I never pictured a future for myself, like careers, and I've always loved to write, but I never really saw myself becoming anything of value. I didn't put a lot of value on myself. Um, and I really struggled with those kind of things. After I had my daughter, I was only 19 when I had her, my oldest, and I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with postpartum depression, is what they had told me. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was going through hypomanic episodes, and they didn't realize either, because when you don't know what you're experiencing, how do you tell someone what you're, like, these symptoms? And it really started in college when I experienced hypomania, and it would be like, staying up all night and being like, wow, I could do my homework all night long. Like, that was crazy. It's, 5 o'clock in the morning and I didn't even need to sleep, and, stuff like that. I get really agitated too, but I never thought anything of it. I thought I was just young and I was a mom, and this was just part of it. And then I had graduated college, and I remember the moment that I got my diploma and my degree, and people were clapping, and I remember wanting to cry because it took me 4 years to get an associate's degree, which should have, well, it's a 2-year degree. And I was so mad at myself, and I just went into, like, a really dark place. And I went to a therapist after this, and I was like, I just don't want to be alive. Like I was so depressed, and I couldn't understand why something so small as this was ruining my life in my head. Like, wow, you are a failure. Like, you might have done 100 things right, but you did not do this thing right. So, you don't deserve life and stuff. And after going to a therapist, and then all of a sudden I remember them talking to me about, okay, when you get like this, how long are you in these periods? And then we started talking about, like, do you ever stay up a lot? Do you ever go through periods where you don't need sleep? Do you ever? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And then, after a while, and then it was like, oh, we think you have bipolar. And I remember just being like devastated, because I'd only ever heard the term be used in movies. And of course, we all know how movies portray people with bipolar. And so I just automatically assumed, like, my kids are going to get taken away. Like, I'm going to be locked in a hospital. Like, my husband's going to leave me. Like, how could I let this happen, was my thought process. And it wasn't actually until 10 years later that I really started to accept my diagnosis and learn about it. So only in 2 years ago, where I was like, well, and actually started telling people, like, I have bipolar, and learning about it. And now, I've accepted it and I live with it really well, but it took a long time for me to get there.
Yeah, that's incredible. So did you go that whole 10 years sort of just like at similar to Sarah in your novel, just like trying to wing it and like not really wanting to action it?
Yeah, so I would go through spurts. So when I would get into a depressive episode that lasted a long period of time, I would go to a doctor and be like, okay. And my husband at the time was in the military. So I would have a bunch of different doctors. It wouldn't be like a regular doctor. So I'd go to a doctor and I'd be like, oh, this therapist, diagnosed me with bipolar. I don't think they're right, but I'm like feeling depressed or whatever. They'd put me on medication. Of course, after medication, sometimes I'd feel better. And then I'd be like, I don't have bipolar. Like, what is wrong with these people? And then I'd get off the medication. And then I'd go back on it or get on it, on and off. And then I spent most of the time, though, unmedicated and just really thinking that this is just normal and how other people live too. Because I wasn't talking about it. So I just assumed, like, everyone lives like this. It wasn't until I got on the right medication and like a plan and a system in place where I realized that you could actually be happy and like live with a condition like bipolar, because I just assumed, like Sarah, like, oh, I'm just winging this until, like, I'll figure it out. I'll cure it myself. I'll fix this. And again, I think that comes back to my like controlling personality. I really thought that I could beat the system, and I couldn't.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. It's like because I feel like I'm a bit the same as you with the controlling personality, and you sort of feel like this will not run my life. Like, no, like, it is not in control here. I am in control. I am stronger than this. And it's a great mentality to have, but you do have to be realistic about, what you can and can't do. But you pulled out two really interesting things there. I think the coming to terms with it and sort of going back and forth in your mind about, no, I'm not bipolar. Oh, maybe I am bipolar. It is a really hard thing to come to terms with, because it is invisible. There's no blood test they can give you that says, yes, 100%, here's the proof. It's literally, an assessment of your moods, and your moods fluctuate so much. And I had the same thing. Like, it took me probably a good six years to come to terms with it. And I'd go through periods where I'd go, no, I'm definitely not bipolar. Maybe that was just a misdiagnosis. But then I'd remember what it felt like to be in those lows and then the highs, and I'd be like, oh, maybe I am. But it is really hard as soon as you because you have periods of normalcy in between, and you think, oh, maybe I'm not bipolar after all.
Yeah. Well, and especially when I would sometimes have people reaffirm, like, if we were talking about mental health conditions, there's some people that would be like, oh, if you exercise, if you diet, if you do all these things, you won't. And I would get so caught up on that. Like, I used to be a spin instructor at a gym, and I would be in the gym an hour and a half a day 6 days a week, and I would be great. I'd be like, "Oh, I'm fine." Well, yeah, because I don't have time to think like that's not a normal thing to do, to be so obsessive about something just to have moments of normal time. And so I realized that like exercise has to be a part of a bigger picture for me. So I have to exercise, but I also have to be medicated. For me, it's something that's very important to keep me stable. And but it was hard when I would talk to people and they would kind of, back that like, well, just change how you're eating or change it. And I'd be like, yeah, if I just do that. And it's like, well, no, you're talking to people that don't understand the complexity of this disorder.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you know, people do, I think they're trying to help, right? But they're not helping because it's very actually dismissive to dismiss, the condition and what you're actually experiencing. It's so important to be able to connect with the right people, the right community who do understand it. Did your friends and loved ones did you feel like they accepted this condition? Like, how did they respond to it?
So I think for me, would like put myself up there with like the top 5% of people that are really good at masking. So like I was really great at masking this condition to my family. Like my husband knew, but again, we didn't know what bipolar really was after the diagnosis. We both kind of like kept it a dirty little secret between each other and let it lie, like, just ignored it. And so it was easy for me to hide from my family because I just wouldn't go around them when I was having an up or a down. And if I was around them when I was having anything, it was an up. And that's just part of what they thought was my personality. Like, oh, she's outgoing. This is how she is. And um, when I came out to my family and told them that I have bipolar, it was 2 years ago when I let everybody know. Um, and they were really supportive. And I ended up finding out like one of my cousins also has bipolar. My mom and my grandma both were like, wow, maybe because it does tend to run in families. And my
Yeah.
mom isn't diagnosed and my grandma isn't diagnosed, but I would be willing to put a lot of money on it that they both probably have it. They have the same symptoms as I do, and me talking about it has helped them like come to that realization too, where they're like, wow, like we understand what you're talking about because we experience these same things. But for the most part, everyone's been supportive. I'm really open about it now, even with my kids. I've talked to them about it extensively. They know when they're really good about catching on to like, oh, mom, is everything okay? And then I'm like, oh wow, like sometimes they catch things before I notice.
That's great. It sounds like, I mean, I'm sure there's, challenges and struggle points within that, but it sounds like, sort of best case scenario, how supportive your family has been. I love that aspect of, you getting your diagnosis, getting treatment, and then also that having an impact on sort of intergenerational healing, because older generations, this wasn't a language they could ever discuss. It was straight jackets into the asylum if you had anything like that. It's really nice that now in our generation we can have knowledge and awareness about this. We can have open conversations, and then that actually like helps flow back through the generations and provide a little bit of ancestral healing there in a way. I'm really into that sort of side of things as
Yes.
well, where that it sounds like that's been able to happen for your family.
Yeah, I think it's helped a lot. And I think it's helped my kids a lot because it's not where I was scared when I got the diagnosis. I feel like I've done enough talking about it in front of my kids where if they do ever get diagnosed with it, they know that they can live with it successfully and they don't have to be afraid. And, that there is success in any mental health condition you might, have.
Definitely. And do you know what else? Like, they're also going to know that you're a safe space for them if they ever experience symptoms or they think that might be what they're going to go through, because you've created that environment for them. They're going to be able to go straight to you and say, Mom, this is happening for me. Like, how do I get help? What should we do? I love that you created that for them as well. You're a safe space. And let's move on to stigma. So you sort of mentioned now you openly share your diagnosis over the last 2 years. Is that right? What's that journey been like? Like, why didn't you disclose it? And then, what helped you make the decision to start talking about it really openly?
So it was actually it's an explosive thing that had happened in my life. So in 2022, my aunt was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. She was diagnosed in 2021, but in 2022, she was put in hospice. And she'd come to me and she'd said, like, I don't want to die in a hospital. And so I was like, move in with me. I'll take care of you, because I was, stay at home mom at that time also. And so I was like, I'll take care of you. And that way you can pass, with family, and it can be this thing. And at the time I was hypomanic and I didn't realize it. And my family, because no one realized it. And this is when I realized, looking back now, how damaging it can be. So I moved my aunt in with me, and during the time that she lived with me before she passed, I was taking care of everything, like her medication, her doctor stuff. Family was coming in and out constantly, so I'm cooking and taking care of everybody, all while also taking my kids to their sporting events and to school, and I'm just like doing it on no sleep. Like I'm just like hyper focused on everything. And so, after something like that, we tend to crash. And so my aunt ended up passing away, and about a week later is when I crashed into depression. And it was the hardest one that I've ever experienced in my life. And it was to a point where, again, I don't know if this is age, but I couldn't hide it. And I've never experienced that before, where I couldn't hide something. I'm really good at it. And so I ended up getting into a huge argument with one of my family members. And this is unlike me. I'm not confrontational at all. And I found myself in a situation where I was like in a parking lot at an apartment complex with family members, and I'm like literally threatening to fight them. And it's just not something I would ever do. And so, they're looking at me, and I will like forever like have the images burn into my brain, like this, like just the way they were looking at me, just like, what is going on? And what, my youngest daughter was with me, and she's like staring at me, and everyone's staring at me, and I'm just screaming at everybody. And I'm just like, all the anger, like I still, like the amount of anger I had built up in me was just unreal. And I was just launching it at everybody. And I got to the point where after I like exploded on everyone, I like, drove away, and I called my best friend and I told her what had happened. And I was just like, I'm never going to come back from this. Like, how no one ever is going to talk to me again. Like, I can't believe this happened. And then I kind of reclused myself from everybody for months. Went by where I wasn't talking to family members that I normally would have talked to daily. I just kept to myself. And then I finally hit a breaking point towards the end of this depressive episode that I had never really been at either, where although I have kids and a husband and a great life, like I was like, I can't imagine living any longer. And it was like, the realest feeling I'd ever experienced, where I was scared for myself, where I felt like I'm truly afraid for, like, I felt like I couldn't trust myself. Like, I need to be hospitalized. I need something, someone, like, I can't save myself. Someone's got to save me. Um, and I remember waking up my husband at like 3 in the morning one morning and telling him, like, I'm gonna die. Like, if I don't, like, I can't keep doing this. And we decided not, this is part of the stigmas. We decided to not go to a hospital because we were scared what that would do. What if it would affect my career, if it's going to affect my kids getting taken away. And so we decided not to. Looking back on it, I most definitely should have been hospitalized. But I think it was a huge wake up call for me and my husband. And we were like, we need people to help me. And so I decided to come clean to my family, and not come clean because it's not something like that. But I decided to tell my family, like, this is what's going on. I was diagnosed 10 years prior. It's just gotten to a point where I can't hide it. This is, what happened. And then they were really supportive. I think, especially because it was something they'd never seen before. And so a death in the family triggered enough to where it was like I just couldn't hide it, and I had to come out and talk about it.
Yeah. Uh, and are you, glad of that now? Like, is the is being open about it having a significant impact for you in how you do manage it and sort of making it easier for you to live with it?
Absolutely. It's so much. I'm, an open book with a lot of, I love talking about things that like make people uncomfortable, like taboo topics. I love talking about this kind of stuff. And so with the bipolar, now being able to talk about it and feeling like I can give myself permission to, it was such a like relief, like a weight off my shoulders. And now literally anyone I talk to, I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, like, let me tell you about this. And, I talk about it, and it has helped a lot because, especially my best friend, who we talk a lot about it. There's when I feel, she's such a safe space for me, that if I feel like I'm slipping into a depression, or if I feel hypomania coming on, like, I will go to her. And even if I'm like pissed off, like, because I don't want anyone to know, maybe about something, I'm like, I'll tell her, like, it's, like, I really feel the depression coming on. Or a lot of the times, what's nice now is I've been open enough about it with my family where they'll catch things before I do. So like, my husband, caught one that was coming on, a few months back. I got started to slip into a depression and didn't realize it. But something I do is I'll actually pick fights with my husband over nothing. And I get really just hyper focused on everything that he's doing. Like, you can't even breathe correctly around me. And so then he noticed, like, oh, is everything okay? Like, what's going on? Let's talk about this. And then I'm like, oh. And a lot of times that helps turn it around before I get into a full blown episode.
Oh, you just brought something up for me there, because I am just remembering, like, going back 10 years ago, pre-diagnosis, where I was with my now husband, who's my boyfriend at the time, and I used to do that too. And I used to just start fights with him. And I had this moment, and he's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Just stop, reflect on what you're saying. It really feels like you're trying to start an argument. Why are you doing that? And I realized, like, sometimes the anger is easier to sit with than the depression and the feelings of devastation and despair. You can sort of turn that into anger, and that feels a lot easier to sit with and have a reason to be feeling negative. So I definitely, relate to that. And it's not easy, and it's not fair to them, but it's a big one to become aware of. That's really nice that he's able to do that for you.
Yeah. And I like that point that you brought up. You're right. I do think it's easier to sit with anger, because at least then we can, you know, justify things. I just
Yeah.
feel like I really like that because it does feel true. Like it's easier to be angry than sad. And I think I
Yeah.
would choose anger over sadness.
It sort of gives you like an illusion of purpose. You're like, no, this is justified. There's a reason to feel this shitty.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you wish other people understood about your condition?
Um, I wish that people understood that I live a relatively normal life. And I use like quotes with that because normal is such like a word, that's it's a weird word. But I don't, I think people that aren't familiar with a lot of these diagnoses think that we're just living this chaotic up and down life, that there's no stability or no like middle ground. And I wish more people realize that, like, actually I treated now that I'm treated and I, take care of it, I live a pretty stable life. Like, after I've been stable for close to 2 years now since my last depressive episode. And it's not going without saying that there's been a few times where I've started to slip into an episode um, over the last 2 years, but I live a pretty stable life, and I have success just like someone that doesn't have bipolar anxiety or ADHD. I mean, there's so much more to it, and that you can live a relatively, like I said, normal life if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. It is something that I think people don't realize as often as they need to, that you can still achieve your dreams. You can still live your life goals. It might take a little bit more creativity to get there, and you might have to make some sacrifices and accommodations. But if you manage it, if you treat it well, if you take it seriously, then there's no reason that you can't still be out there being a full functioning human being most of the time, right? Most of the time.
Yeah.
And what is the best way that others can support you? I think a lot of the time people want to help but don't necessarily know the right way to go about it. What do you actually need from people?
Well, I like this question. I've seen people post actually online about this exact thing. Like, what do you need? And one thing that I've noticed is that what one person might need is like a trigger to another person. And so I feel like that is so variable depending on the person. So for me personally, um, I need to be bugged. So like checked in on, even when I seem annoyed about it. I know that at the end of the day, it's what I need, is because I won't say it unless someone's initiating it. So like when
Okay.
um, I talk to my best friend every single day, 3 times a day. Like, we talk all the time. If I'm going a day, even, or 2 days, she's like coming to me going like, we haven't talked, what's going on? And even in the moment, if that might be like, well, why, like, make me question, like, well, why is she asking that? I'm fine. Well, no, I need her to ask me that because I'm not fine and something's going on. And so for me personally, I need people to check in on me from time to time because I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to initiate it to check in.
Do you feel like they're prompting you to have that self-awareness, like you're not really checked in with yourself until they remind you? Or is it just that you sort of know what's going on but you don't feel comfortable to tell them unless they ask?
I think a little bit of both. I think sometimes I think I have really good self-awareness, but I also have really good ignoring skills. So like I will ignore and avoid conflict even within myself. And so if I'm struggling, I'll try to ignore it away. I know this is like something that I do, or I'll try to distract myself. And the problem with that is obviously that it doesn't go away just because you distracted yourself. It just like bubbles up and gets worse. Where I feel like when someone asks me, then I'm like forced to sit with it and then like evaluate, like, okay, what's going on? Like, why are you yelling at your husband for chewing food? Like, why are we avoiding talking to people? Like, what's going on? Why am I getting so worked up over stuff? And then I really have to like check in with myself and not ignore it away.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's good that you know sort of what you need, and it is different for everyone. So that's a really good one that you've brought up. Is there any accommodations that you would like to see implemented in work or school or just in like society, culture in general that would make living with bipolar easier for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is education for people to be aware that what bipolar is and what people are going through because for me, like there's been times where I might be like just being aware of symptoms where like depression is really hard, and there's times where we still have to like, even if it's hard to get out of bed, we have to get out of bed, and I might not always be on. And so I wish society wasn't so hard on people that aren't smiling and portraying this like you know happy-go-lucky person, that we don't know what someone's going through. So I guess it like applies more to than just to bipolar, but just like people in general. I wish we're more aware of like, you might see like a video online of someone doing something wild and it seems outrageous, but we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know what's going, and we're so quick to judge people with that. And I wish we had a better understanding of just mental health in general across the board. And I feel like it starts at a younger
Yeah.
age. That's why I love NAMI. And what we do is we go in with the younger kids, like middle school, high school, and start educating them on this, because I feel like there's so much judgment when there doesn't need to be, where instead of going, that person needs to be locked up, we should be going like, what is going on with that person and what things can we do to help.
Yeah, I really like that. Just having that, like if we had more awareness in society, we could just have like catch ourselves and have a pause before we cast judgment or blame or, anything on someone else and just go, oh, like that is a weird behavior. Instead of like condemning them for it, maybe we could question like, are they okay? Do they need
Yeah.
some help or support right now? So that's a really good one. Um, okay, that brings me to the end of the questions. I have absolutely loved this conversation with you. You have such a, I can tell you really have a deep understanding of this and a lot of self-awareness yourself. And I'm so thankful that you were comfortable to bring your story here today. I think people can listen to this and maybe relate to it themselves and realize that, oh, bipolar doesn't look like it looks in the movies. It could look like Birdie, it could look like Jade, it could look like, anyone really. And sort of if they identify with any of these symptoms, actually be prompted to take action and get help themselves and sort of make those improvements to their lives as well. I'd love to finish today with a best and worst scenario, because bipolar is not, it's not all bad. What would you say
Yeah.
is the best thing about having this condition, and then also what is the worst thing?
I'd say the best thing about having bipolar is our creativity. I have yet to meet someone that has bipolar that does not have a super creative side to them, regardless if that's with writing or art or singing or whatever. Like, they're just such creative people. And I don't know if that's because, like maybe we've got access to more parts of our brain, and I don't know what it is, but I definitely feel like there's a lot of very creative people that have bipolar. And so that's definitely like, best thing I think that we have. I think the hardest thing is there not being a cure, there not being something. So it's not a choice. We don't have a choice. We can try to manage the best we can, but at the end of the day, it's still something that is in our brain. And so I feel like that's the hard thing, is that at the end of the day, if, if things go where you go into a depressive episode or a manic one, like that's part of the disorder, and we don't always get to control when that happens.
I feel like we're same person sometimes in what you've said. I think I gave the like this, I asked myself these questions and my two answers were pretty much the same. A lot of the things you've said today, I'm like, I really resonate with that. It's been so nice to chat to you today.
Well, I've loved it. I like your questions, and I think you did a really good job.
Thank you. That's helpful for my imposter syndrome and getting me across the board here. I'm trying to get my confidence up with it, but doing it anyway, and that's the main thing, I think. I just want to shout out again that Birdie's book, I Am Her, She Is Me, is available on Amazon. You can buy it on Kindle. You can buy it as a hard copy. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes, but I definitely want to shout out that is a great read. It's it's a really unputdownable book. She's written a great sort of fiction narrative there, and if you do want to learn more about this condition and what that feels like, heavily encourage going and grabbing a copy of that. I'm going to put some links to Birdie's Instagram in the show notes as well. I love her little videos that are just really relatable about, aspects of bipolar that sort of, really do break the ice and break down the stigma around it as well. So you can find that all in the show notes and connect further with Birdie. And again, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, Birdie. It's been so great to have a chat with you today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Enjoying the Neurodiaries? Every interaction helps break the stigma, so be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favourite podcast listening app. Visit our Instagram at the Neurodiaries Podcast and join our Facebook group to continue the conversation. Through sharing and connection, we can foster understanding, empathy, and support for all.